Have you ever walked into a room and felt every gaze shift toward you, not because you made a scene, but because your presence changed the energy? That's exactly what happened to me. I wasn't trying to start anything. But when my sister told me not to bring a date to her big engagement dinner, I brought someone she never saw coming. And in that moment, the whole room changed. But let's start at the beginning. Before we get into the story, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. It's always amazing to see how far these stories reach. And if you enjoy videos that feel personal, stories that pull you in and make you think, feel free to like this video and subscribe to the channel. There's more coming always. Now, let me take you back to a Thursday afternoon when everything seemed ordinary, until one message from my sister changed everything. Here's how it all began. There's a certain kind of silence that follows a message like that, one that stretches across your chest like a weight, subtle but suffocating. The kind of silence where your brain tries to convince your heart not to overreact, even as your stomach coils in protest. That was the silence I sat in when Amanda's text lit up my screen. You're invited, of course, just, please don't bring a date. It's a small thing, family only. It was the just that killed me. A seemingly harmless word like a gentle nudge, not a shove. Except it was a shove. Polite, surgical. Designed to make me feel like I was still welcome while quietly removing my right to exist as a full person. Not a request, a restriction. Not out of necessity, but preference. Her preference. I sat with my phone in my lap, staring at those few words like they might morph into something softer if I blinked enough. They didn't. Amanda never said anything she didn't mean, and she never left anything to chance. If she said family only, she meant no distractions, no complications, and certainly no one who might make me look like less. Because Amanda's world was a tightrope, and I had never been great at balancing. I was the girl who wore combat boots to brunch, who changed cities like haircuts, who dated people that made Amanda clear her throat disapprovingly. I didn't fit in the glossy Instagram grid she curated, not as I was. I could already picture the scene she was arranging. White linen tablecloths, wine glasses catching the soft overhead light. A perfectly chosen restaurant with a view just right for sunset photos. Adam at her side, all khakis and compliance, smiling like a cardboard cutout. Guests from both families, the ones who mattered, the ones who could be posted about later. And in that picture-perfect mental snapshot, I was there too, but alone. Quiet, decorative, present but not highlighted. She hadn't said it out loud, but I could feel it vibrating underneath every word. You don't get to take attention away from me, not this time. The cruelty of it wasn't in what she said. It was in what she didn't say. She didn't say, I want you to come and be happy. She didn't say, I want you to feel seen. She said, just don't bring a date. And beneath that, I heard the message she wouldn't admit even to herself. Don't disrupt the image I've crafted. Don't embarrass me with your unpredictability. Amanda and I had always danced this silent war, choreographed over years of sibling comparison and subtle dismissals. She didn't scream or throw tantrums. She weaponized excellence. She built her life like a resume and treated people like recommendations. I, on the other hand, lived in margins. My life was built in bursts and brushstrokes, freelance gigs and handwritten poems in coffee-stained notebooks. I once dyed my hair purple on a whim. She nearly staged an intervention. We weren't just different, we were fundamentally opposed. And yet I still showed up. I still answered when she called. I still tried, in the quiet corners of my heart, to believe there was a version of us that could coexist, if not harmoniously, then at least without cutting each other down. But that message proved what I already knew. Amanda didn't see me as an equal. She saw me as a risk. As if who I chose to walk in with might cause the entire facade she'd built to crack. I closed the text thread without replying. My hand shook, just slightly, as I placed the phone down. But my mind was suddenly clear. Something shifted in me. Not rage exactly. Something cooler, sharper. I thought about saying no, just skipping the whole event, writing her off the way she seemed to want to write me out of her life. But that would have been too easy. That would have been playing by her rules. Instead, I made a different decision, quiet, deliberate, and far more dangerous. If Amanda was worried about someone stealing her spotlight, maybe she should have been more careful about which ghosts she tried to bury. I opened my contacts list and scrolled down to the name I hadn't expected to use again. The man Amanda never spoke of. The one she used, then pushed aside when his usefulness ran out. Thomas Whitaker. Former senior partner, former mentor, former power figure at her firm, until he wasn't. I had met him once accidentally at a gala Amanda forced me to attend 3 years ago. I remembered his eyes, intelligent, watchful, and the subtle way he noticed everything Amanda didn't say. He was twice my age, but the way he carried himself made the room curve around him. And Amanda had loathed that. Back then, I'd thought he was part of her story. Now I realized, maybe I could be part of his. My fingers hovered over the screen. One tap and this dinner wouldn't just be about Amanda and Adam and their pastel-filtered life plan. It would be about power. And for once, it might actually be mine. 6 months ago, I wasn't thinking about payback. It was a Thursday evening in early spring, one of those nights when the air smelled like promise and dust, and the city hummed with that particular kind of elegance reserved for overpriced gallery openings. I'd been dragged there by a friend who insisted I get out and mingle more, which in her language meant dress up and pretend to like abstract art while sipping tepid Prosecco. I had no expectations, not for conversation, not for connection, and certainly not for any strategic alliances. And then Thomas Whitaker walked in. He didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. Some people simply belong in a room, not because they demand it, but because the room adjusts to fit them. That was Thomas. Broad-shouldered, salt and pepper hair, clean lines on a navy wool coat that probably cost more than my rent. But it wasn't his appearance that drew me in. It was the stillness, the kind of self-possession that's earned, not worn, like he'd seen enough chaos in his life to no longer be startled by anything. He ended up next to me at the installation of rusted metal birds welded onto steel wire, the sort of thing you nod thoughtfully at while wondering how anyone prices symbolism at 5 figures. He raised a brow, glanced at me, and murmured, "Are they flying or falling?" Without looking at him, I said, "Depends who's watching." He smiled. It wasn't condescending. It wasn't flirtatious. It was impressed, like someone had finally spoken a language he missed. That was the beginning. We spent the next 2 hours moving from piece to piece, speaking in half confessions. He told me about his background in law, the burnout, the disillusionment. I told him about my years jumping coasts and careers, always searching for something that didn't feel like a lie. He didn't try to fix me. I didn't try to impress him. It was adult conversation in its rarest form, clean, mutual, edged in something sharp and unspoken. It wasn't until a week later, after a casual coffee turned into dinner, that I learned his full name and what it used to mean. Thomas Whitaker, former senior partner at Goldstein and Hunt, the man who built the commercial litigation department from the ground up, the mentor, the golden goose, and apparently the one Amanda had quietly replaced. Not officially, not directly, that's not how she operated, but the whispers were there, spoken in elevators, passed between assistants like gossip-laced currency. There had been a quiet push, an internal power shuffle, a failed motion, a memo leaked at just the right moment. And Amanda, the rising star, had landed a newly created leadership role just weeks after Thomas took a sudden leave. They said it was mutual. It never is. When I pieced it together, I didn't feel giddy or scandalized. I felt aware. As if fate had dropped something in my lap and whispered, "Pay attention." Thomas never spoke about her in detail. He referred to her once vaguely as ambitious, but the weight behind that word told me everything. He didn't hate her. He had measured her, and she'd come up short. Still, I hadn't seen him since that gallery night. We exchanged a few texts over the months, casual, warm, nothing loaded. He lived in a different orbit now, private consulting, a few nonprofit boards, and occasionally sipping whiskey at intimate fundraisers for causes he actually believed in. He had shed the skin of his old life with the quiet ruthlessness of someone who'd already mourned the loss of power, and found freedom on the other side. And then Amanda's text landed like a stone in my shoe. I didn't respond right away. I sat with the discomfort. I let it turn, calcify, take shape. I knew exactly what Amanda feared, being upstaged, overshadowed, outshone. It wasn't about the date. It was about control. The symmetry of it all, her pushing Thomas out, and me pulling him back in, was too sharp to ignore. So I texted him the next morning. "Would you do something petty and mildly scandalous?" His reply was immediate. "Is it legal?" "Barely. Pick me up at 6. He didn't need more information. That was the beauty of Thomas. He understood subtext. He read between the lines and trusted his instincts, and his instincts told him something I already knew. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the narrative. I didn't want to humiliate Amanda, not exactly. I wanted her to feel the presence of something she couldn't spin or suppress, something that didn't yield to her perfect lighting and curated smiles. I wanted her to remember that she didn't always win, that sometimes the pieces she thought she'd discarded had sharp edges waiting to be picked up again. And Thomas, he wasn't a weapon. He was a mirror, one I was ready to hold up to her and let her look. Because she'd buried him to build herself. But ghosts have a way of showing up for dinner. There are entrances you plan, and then there are entrances that make the room rearrange itself. The restaurant Amanda chose was exactly what I expected. A rooftop oasis perched high above the city skyline, as if declaring itself untouchable. String lights looped overhead like constellations curated by Pinterest. Velvet chairs and jewel tones were carefully spaced for photo-friendly symmetry. The scent of lavender and lemon zest hung in the air, expensive and intentional, like every detail Amanda ever touched. It wasn't a place for food. It was a place for presentation, for being seen, admired, and envied. A place where people whispered in compliments and raised eyebrows in mutual recognition of status. We walked in together, Thomas and I, not with fanfare, but with gravity. His arm looped through mine, his tailored suit crisp and understated. His expression was calm, unreadable. Mine was sharper, practiced in the mirror that morning. Not hostile, not smug, just serene. We didn't need to announce ourselves, the silence did it for us. A lull swept the room the moment we stepped past the hostess. You could practically hear the collective intake of breath from Amanda's curated circle of friends and extended family, all of them caught between their politeness and their curiosity. Forks paused mid-air. Glasses hung inches from lips. At the far end of the room, Amanda stood, glowing in a crimson dress that hugged her like a headline. She was laughing, hand gently on someone's arm, the picture of control and social finesse. Her laugh stopped when she saw us. She didn't move, not at first. But her expression did. Her lips parted, not quite surprise, not quite fear. Her spine pulled straighter, like someone hit an invisible reset button. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her wineglass. Adam stood beside her like a wax figure, slightly behind, eyes darting from her to us and back again, trying to gauge the weather. "Riley," she said at last. Her voice had that glacial smoothness she perfected over the years. "I thought I asked you not to bring a date." I stepped forward, unhurried. "You did. You said family only." I tilted my head slightly and gave her a smile so soft it could cut marble. "But technically, Thomas was yours first." The implication landed like a gust of cold air. Murmurs rippled through the guests like an uncontrolled brush fire. Thomas stepped forward with the kind of poise only men like him could pull off. Deliberate, unshaken, eyes locked on Amanda with the precision of a chess master. "Congratulations, Amanda," he said, voice low and intimate, yet audible to every corner of the table. "To think? I taught you everything you know." He reached for her hand. She offered it reflexively, as if muscle memory overrode emotion. But her fingers barely touched his. Her smile, or the ghost of one, hovered, strained at the corners. She didn't respond. Couldn't, not verbally. The shock lived in her pupils, dilated and fixed. She looked like someone who had walked into a room expecting to find a gift and instead found a mirror. Every pair of eyes was on us, watching, calculating, waiting for Amanda to reclaim the room. But she didn't speak. And that silence, her silence, was louder than anything else. Then Thomas turned. He lifted his glass and, with the timing of a practiced performer, announced in a clear, deliberate voice, "To Riley, for her boldness, and for showing me what true company should feel like." It was a masterstroke, wrapped in velvet but barbed underneath. The words sounded kind, even gallant, but everyone in the room could hear what lived between the lines. There was a beat of stunned stillness. Someone cleared their throat. Another whispered to their neighbor behind a napkin. Amanda blinked. A small thing, barely perceptible, but it was the first break in her composure. Like a hairline fracture in frosted glass, you only noticed it when the light hit just right. She blinked again, then her gaze flickered to Adam, who was now shifting uncomfortably beside her, clearly regretting every moment of his proximity to this scene. Amanda's armor, a curated, airtight persona she carried like a second skin, had cracked. Not shattered. Not yet, but cracked enough. And that was all I needed. I felt the slow surge of something like satisfaction rising in my chest. Not revenge, not exactly. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about equilibrium. For once, Amanda wasn't the architect of the moment. She wasn't the focal point. She was the subject of it. The tension in the air didn't vanish, but it changed temperature. It was no longer about anticipation. It was fascination now. Who was this man at Riley's side? Why hadn't Amanda warned them? What did he mean by everything you know? Amanda sat down slowly, brushing non-existent lint from her dress. The fabric didn't move. Her posture didn't relax, but her control had slipped, and she knew it. And the evening had only just begun. The hum of silverware returned eventually, but the rhythm of the dinner never quite recovered from our entrance. Amanda tried. Oh, how she tried. She leaned harder into the performance the way only someone born to wear a mask can. Her laughter rang out too often, too sharp, brittle where it used to be controlled. She became suddenly generous with compliments, overly attentive to the guests she previously ignored, as though kindness now might erase the shift in energy that had swept through the table like a cold front. But it was too late. The room had already recalibrated. The gravity had changed. Thomas didn't dominate. That wasn't his style. He invited. He listened. When he spoke, it was with the calm authority of someone who didn't need to prove anything. He told a story about restoring a centuries-old home in Vermont and somehow made it sound like a metaphor for rebuilding a life. People leaned in, not just physically, but emotionally. They wanted to be near him, drawn to the quiet strength that Amanda had once tried to snuff out because it cast too long a shadow. And he never mentioned her. Not directly, not pointedly. That silence, too, spoke volumes. Amanda noticed. She noticed everything. She clung to Adam, touching his arm constantly, fingers wrapped just a little too tightly around his wrist. He tried to keep up, nodding along to her stories, laughing when she laughed. But the desperation radiating off her made it impossible to miss the imbalance. He looked like a man dragged into a role he hadn't auditioned for. Meanwhile, Amanda's friends, the ones who had posted selfies with her at charity galas, tagged her in polished brunch photos, bragged about her early promotion, shifted their allegiance almost imperceptibly. They weren't overt about it, but their eyes strayed toward Thomas during lulls in conversation. They asked about his time in Tokyo, how he'd learned to speak Italian, what it was like leaving the firm. He didn't gloat. He just existed with unapologetic depth. And I didn't need to say much. I watched, observed, let Amanda feel what it was like to orbit someone else's son. By the time dessert was served, a pear tart arranged with military precision on black ceramic, Amanda's grip on the evening had thinned to gossamer. She didn't touch her wine anymore. She smiled too tightly, her mouth tense at the corners, her laughter reduced to a dry chuckle that didn't reach her eyes. And then, halfway through the table conversation about travel photography, she stood abruptly. "I'll be right back," she said. It was controlled, choreographed, but her napkin dropped to the floor as she rose, and for just a flicker of a second, the mask slipped. Her hands trembled when she bent to retrieve it. I waited 3 beats, then followed her. The restroom was empty, echoing with the soft hum of distant music and the occasional clink of plates from the kitchen beyond the hallway. Amanda stood in front of the mirror, both hands braced against the porcelain sink like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She didn't look at me when I entered. She didn't need to. "You brought in just to humiliate me," she said, voice low, full of venom and fear braided together. I leaned against the wall, arms folded. "No. I brought someone who treats me with respect. Someone who doesn't edit me out of their life for the sake of appearances." She turned sharply, eyes glassy but dry. Amanda never cried, not in front of anyone, not even as a child. Emotions were something she ironed out like wrinkles. "This was supposed to be my night. And it still could have been," I said. "But you wanted control more than you wanted peace. You couldn't let me show up as myself, not without trimming the edges first." Her lips pressed into a line. "He hates me." I shook my head slowly. "No, he pities you," she froze. It wasn't the kind of moment where someone shatters. It was worse. She internalized it, took it like a pill she didn't want to swallow, but couldn't spit out. Because she knew it was true. Her eyes darted to the mirror, not at me, at herself, as if searching for cracks in the image she spent her life polishing. She looked older in that moment, not in years but in wear. The kind of age that comes from fighting to hold together something already collapsing. You don't know what it's like, she said, her voice thin. To have to prove yourself over and over. To be taken seriously. To keep what you've earned. I stepped forward. No, Amanda. You just never learned how to share space with anyone who didn't flatter your reflection. That landed harder than I expected. For a moment I thought she might hit me, or scream, but she didn't either. She looked away, jaw tense, throat working hard to swallow the pride curdling inside her. I built everything I have. And now you're afraid someone else might build something that shines just as brightly, without needing to step on anyone. Silence fell between us like a closing curtain. Amanda turned back to the mirror, reapplying her lipstick with precision, as if control could be redrawn in crimson. Her face was calm again, but I knew, behind the gloss and contour, that unraveling had begun. And for once, she couldn't stop it. The night air hit us the moment we stepped out of the restaurant, cool, crisp, and heavy with the silence of things unspoken. Above us, the city lights blinked like a slow, knowing applause, their soft glow catching on the steel lines of skyscrapers and the curve of Thomas' car just up the block. It wasn't late, but it felt final. We hadn't waited for dessert to finish. We hadn't waited for Amanda's carefully rehearsed toast or the obligatory speech about love and new beginnings. We didn't need to. Some exits aren't about leaving. They're about declaring you're no longer tethered. Thomas walked beside me without comment, hands in his pockets, face unreadable but easy. He didn't offer hollow praise or ask if I was okay. He didn't need to. He knew. He'd seen what I came to do, and more importantly, he'd understood it. We stopped just before the car. The city had thinned out around us, the noise dulled, the street still, as if the world had exhaled. I know what you're thinking, I said quietly, not quite looking at him. That it was petty. His brow lifted, amused. No, he said. I was thinking it was clean. That surprised a laugh out of me, a small, sharp thing. She's always made me feel like I didn't belong, I said. Like I was the unfinished version of her life, the mess, the embarrassment. I tried so hard not to care about it, to convince myself I was living free while she was living scripted. And I was lying to myself, I admitted. It always mattered, because part of me still thought that one day she'd see me, not as the chaos next to her order, not as the misfit sibling, but as someone whole, someone enough. Thomas didn't interrupt. He just listened, which was the rarest kind of generosity. But she never gave me that, I went on, the words tumbling out like coins from a loose purse. Because she only understands value in terms of control, and I don't fit into that. I never did, so I stopped trying. Tonight, I didn't go to prove her wrong. I went to prove me right, that I could stand beside someone like you and not disappear. That I didn't have to apologize for who I am. His gaze softened. Riley, he said, you walked into that room like a queen. You didn't flinch. Not once. That's not rebellion. That's royalty. There was a long silence after that, the kind that settles in the bones. Then he added, more quietly, don't let anyone dim that crown. I didn't say anything back. I didn't need to. Some truths don't require affirmation. They just require being heard. I watched his taillights fade down the block, and when I finally walked back to my apartment, it felt like I'd shed a skin. Not Amanda's, not my family's, but my own. The version of me that kept shrinking to make other people comfortable had been left behind in that rooftop dining room, tangled in the velvet chairs and string lights and awkward smiles. I hadn't just made a point. I'd reclaimed myself. The next morning, the sunlight filtered in with a pale gentleness, like the sky wasn't quite sure if it was allowed to be bright yet. I sat in bed, still wrapped in yesterday's softness, my phone buzzing on the nightstand. A message. Amanda. You always have to ruin things, don't you? I stared at the words for a long time. Not because they hurt. They didn't. Not anymore. But because they were so predictable, so small. Even after all that, she couldn't see it. She still thought I was the problem. That the cracks in her evening were something I'd caused, instead of something she'd built into her foundation by refusing to share the stage. I didn't reply. What could I possibly say that would reach her through the walls she'd spent years layering with accolades and perfection? Some wars aren't worth fighting again. Some doors don't need to be slammed shut, just gently closed and locked from the inside. I set the phone down. And yet I wasn't angry. Not anymore. What I felt was weightless. There's a kind of justice that doesn't need a verdict or applause. It lives in the shift of power you feel when someone who always looked through you is suddenly watching you. For once, I had made the room pause. I had made her blink, not with cruelty, not with chaos, but with calm, deliberate presence. They saw me, all of them. They heard me without needing me to raise my voice. And Amanda? She saw what she couldn't manufacture, real connection, not something curated, not something controlled, but something earned, effortlessly, naturally, without compromise. That was what lingered. That was justice.